Hello, folks, and welcome to GDC 2020 Summer Conference. This talk is part of the Skill Building series and is pixel art and animation in the Hybit age. Our host is Tyriq, noted pixel artist with some sharp-looking titles under his belt. I am Joel Couture, and I will be moderator for this session. Now, Tyriq, here's the floor.
Hello, I am Tyriq Plummer. I make games. I have a few goals for this session because I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about pixel art and animation in the Hybit age, which is why I named the talk that. The first goal is to kind of lay out the role of pixel art in modern games and define what it means to be in the Hybit age. The second goal is to provide some examples of contemporary pixel art that I think are pushing the medium and its aesthetic potential forward. And the final goal is to give specific technical insight and advice into how to actually make pixel art with a live demonstration. But first, who am I? I'm a game designer and artist who's been making pixel art since I was a wee lad. I've done pixel art for a number of games, including Thor DS, Epic Mickey, Power of Illusion, Adventure Time, Explore the Dungeon Because I Don't Know. Most recently, I've done work on Cadence of Hyrule and UFO 50. And I've also spent a not insignificant portion of my soul working for an unhealthy number of years on my platformer roguelike Catacomb Kids. All of this is to say, I really like pixel art, and I think I'm not terrible at it, which is about the highest praise I'm willing to afford myself. So that's pretty good. All that being said, what is Hybit Art? Oops, I forgot to go forward. This is Cadence of Hyrule, a game I worked on. This is Catacomb Kids, my game, my beloved precious baby. What is Hybit Art? The term was coined by Simon Anderson, also known as Snake, who is an incredibly skilled pixel artist and the creator of Owlboy. He coined the term to describe modern pixel art that has, quote, pushed beyond the limitations of the old formats and, quote, operates beyond the limitations of the old 8, 16, and 32-bit consoles. When I tell people I do pixel art, even people within the games industry, a lot of time they're like, oh, you mean like 16-bit stuff or like SNES type stuff? And increasingly, these comparisons just don't make sense anymore because we as pixel artists aren't confined by the hardware limitations of those old systems of 16 and 18-bit hardware. So to say I do that kind of art would kind of be a lie or a misnomer. There's a tendency to think that pixel art immediately equates to nostalgia. And while that is kind of a large part of its appeal to a lot of people, I think that to assume that nostalgia is the primary force behind pixel aesthetics ignores all the work done by pixel artists in the meantime to push the medium forward in the intervening stretch of time between nostalgia and now. Like that whole time period existed and pixel artists did too. And they've been making progress for a long time. The first thing to understand is that pixel art isn't just a style of art, it's a medium. And like any medium, it can contain and convey a multitude of styles and aesthetics. And equally importantly, like any medium, pixel art has continued to evolve alongside newer technologies and tools in the same way that photography didn't make painting obsolete, but shifted its context. The computing power that has made high resolution and complex 3D art in games possible hasn't made pixel art obsolete, but it has shifted its context. So that's the end of the preamble. With that out of the way, let's look at some examples of Hybit modern art. And at this point, Joel, if you have any questions about the particular games that I'm bringing up, feel free to ask away.
Will do.
So this is Retro City Rampage. So even though I know I just said that nostalgia isn't the primary driving force behind pixel art, it is still a big part of what people find appealing about it. And some modern games really play into that perception. This being one of them. Retro City Rampage. It just looks old. Kind of emulates the aesthetic of old NES games to evoke those same feelings of the hardware limitations. I think there's actually even a version of Retro City Rampage that will run on an NES, but that's not to say that it hasn't taken the lessons that pixel artists have learned and the techniques that they've developed since the time of the NES and incorporated them into their aesthetic as well. Always Awakening is another example of a modern retro-looking game that uses pixel art, very much in the sort of Zelda 2 style looking. UFO 50, which is a game that I'm working on, is another game that sort of leans into the perception of pixel art as having a retro association and aesthetic to it. So for UFO 50, we're working with a made-up restrictions for an imaginary console, essentially. But sometimes we can bend and break those restrictions because we're not actually working with the hardware. So we give ourselves a little leeway when it comes to certain aspects of like, oh, this will just make the game better, or make this more readable, or make more sense, and that sort of thing. So there aren't any like we're roughly following some color restrictions and that sort of thing in terms of how many colors per tile we can use. And we try to keep, sprites to a relative minimum because old hardware had limited sprites per scan line and that sort of thing, which caused the flickering that happened. But we don't really have those limitations, so they're really self-enforced. And if we don't enforce them, then the game just is what it is. This is another UFO 50 game. So beyond the games that sort of lean into the retro aesthetic, I think there are also a number of games that sort of display a virtuosic nature to pixel art, where it's just really dang good, just normal pixel art, nothing super fancy going on. This is Heartforth Alicia, one of those. Currently in development, another sort of long-running development game that makes me feel more at home with Catacomb Kids, which I've been working on for a very long time. But this is just a really good looking game that just has very good pixel art. And I think that is another sort of trend of modern pixel art games, is that people have taken the lessons that have been learned over the past decades of techniques and sort of introspection into the medium and taken them to their natural heights. More Heartforth Alicia. I'm really looking forward to that game. Iconoclasts would be another example that I would say falls under that category. It doesn't do a whole lot that's extremely fancy. It's just very good. And you can see that the screen size for this is like significantly larger than a lot of other pixel art games, and the real estate to match modern displays. So that's another trend that's kind of happening to modern pixel art, is that the artists are having to adapt to more modern displays that aren't like, tiny CRTs or very small like mobile phone screens and that sort of thing. So we have a lot more real estate to work with. And sometimes that can be a challenge, because when you have more real estate to work with, you have to work harder to make it interesting and fill it up in ways that are aesthetically pleasing. Owlboy, as mentioned, created by the coiner of the term Hybit, is another example of just virtuosic pixel art. Very pretty game. And then we have things that combine pixel art with other sort of medium. So this is Octopath Traveler, which combines pixel art with 3D, and you can see it does something like combining pixel art with 3D isn't super new. That's been a thing since PlayStation 1 era, and I think Breath of Wild 4 had a really good look about it. But you can see this is using a lot more modern techniques, like using the depth of field to blur the background, and a lot of like really soft lighting effects, and kind of the vignetting at the edge of the screen. That gives it a really unique look and appearance. All the textures you can see in the environment are still pixeled, which keeps everything feeling grounded in the same sort of style. This is another example, a game in development called Zealot, which combines pixel art with 3D environments. And this is a game called The Last Night, which is also in development. It looks kind of crazy, but you can definitely see there's pixels happening. And this is kind of a combination of, I think, like virtuosic talent and aesthetic with the extremely modern like combination of 3D and depth of field and all the lighting effects and all that sort of thing. I've never really seen anything like this, so I'm curious to see how this actually turns out once it's finished. There's also a game developer named Chloe, also Super Blizzard on Twitter, who combines, again, sort of combining the two things of nostalgia and retro aesthetics with 3D art. This picture is really tiny. I'm sorry. Hold on, let me see if I can make it bigger. There we go. So yeah, like combining 3D with these retro aesthetics and keeping everything quite chunky. And I think this is a really fun, good look. More work by the same developer.
Tyriq, if you don't mind me interrupting, you've shown quite a bit of flexibility with this style for
Yes.
very different things. What draws you to continually work in pixel art and to use it in so many unique ways?
That's a great question. I find the limitations of working in low resolution kind of conducive to creativity. Working in lower resolutions like sort of limits my decision space when it comes to certain things, but at the same time, as you said, there is a lot of flexibility in it, and so I feel like a lot of times I have to come up with creative solutions and creative ways to solve visual problems in pixel art that in other media there's a little more leeway, and so those restrictions are kind of not harder to come by. Like, you can always make restrictions for yourself, but I find that the particular restrictions of pixel art are engaging to me in the way that they force you to think about the way you use details and how to represent things in such a small real estate. And as well, I think that as I'm showing, like, there's still a lot of exploration in the space to be done, and I want to be a part of that process. So this is a game still in development called Acid Knife by the developers of Crawl. And as you can see, it's got a lot going on in terms of, like, there's a lot of like shader effects that are kind of melting and blending the world around in the dark sections. Like, that's not video artifacting. That's just how the game looks, which I find really fascinating, is the idea of taking pixel art and then manipulating it after the fact with these post-processing effects that still maintain the aesthetic and stay in the style and resolution of these games, but while expanding what's possible and beyond what could be normally done by just human hands working on single frames of game and that sort of thing. There's another still shot of the game. Radio the Universe is another sort of game that has a lot of post-processing effects and glitchy sort of styling to it. Also still in development. A lot of these games are still in development. I guess I just like games that aren't out yet. But yeah, I think this is a really good example of a game that just takes the pixel aesthetic and sort of twists it and like leans really heavily into it while still being its own completely unique thing. You can see it looks like it went through like a lot of like Photoshop filters and what have you. There's some chromatic aberration on the numbers where the RGB channels are kind of slightly separated. Megasphere is, I think, what I would say is another sort of combination of virtuosic pixel art combined with a lot of like these shader effects and whatnot. It uses like normal mapping to use lighting on the actual environment and characters, and there's a lot of you can see like there's a lot of like glowing lights that aren't strictly in the resolution as the sprites and stuff. And I think this is one of the few games I've seen that does like resolution mixing in that way really well, in a way that isn't detrimental. So yeah, I think it looks kind of wild and really good. More of it. Carrion is another game that uses the pixel aesthetic and pixel art, but combines it with a highly procedurally animated like main character protagonist. Kind of hesitant to call it that. Your big meat blob that goes around killing things and escaping labs and what have you. But yeah, you can see like this meat blob is very procedurally animated. Like all the tentacles and such are just kind of whipping and lashing out in various ways, willy-nilly. But it's all still within the same sort of lower resolution pixel aesthetic. And you can also see that the lighting coming through the windows is sort of something that wouldn't have necessarily existed in older hardware on pixel art games. Pathway, yet another example, I think, of virtuosic mixing with modern technology. The as far as I understand it, like this game has like a whole lighting engine where basically they combine pixel art with voxels, so to make the tiles and elements in the game have actual volumetric lighting, which is something I've never seen before and is really fascinating. So like all these walls and characters cast actual shadows because they're technically voxel bodies that just aren't being drawn and instead are being drawn as pixel art, which I think is a really clever solution to that. And so that's kind of the end of that sort of look over existing games that are doing things. There's a lot more out there. There's by no means a all-encompassing extensive list. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of run through a few of those things before we started getting into the actual practical application of the pixels. So any questions about any of that, or what's up?
We've got some about what's your favorite software to use for developing high-bit modern art?
Fantastic question and an excellent segue. So there are a number of programs that exist for pixel art. My personal favorite is GraphicsScale, which is free. It used to not be. It used to be $20. And I got it when it wasn't free, but it's free now. I like it a lot. I've used it for like over a decade, which is kind of weird to say, that I've been doing this for that long. But you can see it right now because this is, if you want to go back to my screen, this is a character that I drew a while ago, the Giraffian, because he's a giraffe and a ruffian. Ha ha ha! I'm proud of that. And so I was like, I need something to pixel for this dang stream. So for this talk rather. So I chose this guy, and I made a little tiny sprite of him, and this is what GraphicsScale looks like. There are a lot of other programs that exist. Sprite is one of them that I know a lot of people use. It's a more recent one. I really like the timeline in Sprite for like animating and that sort of thing. It's much more akin to, I think, like Flash timeline, if you're familiar with that. And it also lets you like separate multiple different animations without having to have completely separate files for them. So that's one. Another one is Pixel Edit, which I've only used a very little bit of, but seems really promising, and I might actually consider transferring to that if if I put enough work and effort into learning how it works. It has some neat features like being able to move around layers in an animated fashion, so that you can like animate a face and then like have it stick to the character. And then if you want to make a change to the face, you'd only have to change one frame, and then it changes on every frame. It has some really neat features like that. So Pixel Edit, spelled with a Y, Pyxel. If you're looking for software, that might be one to check out. Another one, ProMotion, I've heard is one that people use. I've never personally used it, but I've heard it's decent and good, and has been around for quite a while, similar to how GraphicsScale has. So yeah, there's a lot of software out there. GraphicsScale is the one that I use just because it's what I'm most familiar with. Yeah, and I figured if I'm going to be doing this live, I should use the program that I'm quickest in. So let's do some animating, and I can answer some questions if anybody has them. Oh, so actually, I have more to say about this. So I made this giraffe guy, and I was like, oh yeah, let me just animate this guy. And then I was like, wait a second, this is a lot of detail. I don't know if I can do this in 45 minutes, now around 20. So I like simplified the shading, and I was like, that's not actually going to help that much. So we'll see how far I get with this. But I think one of the important things to understand about pixel art is that like the lack and presence of certain details can really like make and break a sprite. Like as an example, like if I had like a ball about like that big, let's say like this is my entire sprite, right? Like I just got like a little ball this big, and I want him to have buttons on his belly, you know, like let's say this is a little happy face right here. One thing like about pixel art is the fact that you're working with such small resolutions means that the units of size are like significant relative to the scale of the entire piece. So like these buttons here, if I want him to have like a curved belly, like these buttons, like a single pixel is all I need to get that impression across, right? And so the same applies for like these larger sprites and that sort of thing. Like if I come back here, you can see like this is supposed to be like a little pocket zipper thing that I just kind of alternated darker and lighter pixels on to get the zipper effect across. But if I'm going to have to be working on this and animating it, I don't want to necessarily have to render that every frame. So I just simplified it to a single line. There's a lot of anti-aliasing around his edges and that sort of thing that if I'm going to be rendering is going to take time. It's not going to actually affect the process of animating it, because animation is like more focused on the actual like present details. So like if I wanted to make animating him easier, I would probably get rid of this zipper so that I wouldn't have to do the secondary animation on that sort of thing, flopping around. And like I wouldn't give him shoelaces because that would be another thing to animate. But I kind of think of animation and rendering as sort of separate processes. So simplifying this made the rendering process easier, but the animation process is still going to be roughly I'd say equally as difficult or easy, whatever the case may be.
All right. We do have a couple more questions. For someone who's just starting to get into making pixel art, what courses or YouTube channels can you point us at for learning the basics?
So I know Derek Yu had a pixel art tutorial for a long time, and he just recently updated it. I would recommend checking that out. It's quite a good tutorial. There are a lot of good tutorials that exist. I would also recommend checking out or joining a community, pixel art community. Pixel Joint is a good one. It's quite friendly to beginners, and it has like a whole like gallery section to it that you can check out other people's works on and post your own work on and get critiques and feedback. And Pixelation is another one, which is, I think, at wayofthepixel.net. Or if you just Google Pixelation Forum, it'll pop up. I know it's not a YouTube channel. Not super aware of like specific YouTube channels and video series and that sort of thing that tutorialize pixel art as much. But I found the most valuable thing to be actually engaging with other pixel artists and getting their feedback and giving them feedback, because if you can learn how to critique something, then it'll help you improve yourself by leagues as well. Personally, I also stream very often. I have a Twitch stream that I stream on. It's at 4-Bit Friday on Twitch, and I usually do programming stuff, but I also occasionally will just do pixel art, and I'm quite happy to, if you have questions, if you stop by there, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability, or if you have work that you want feedback on, I can do that as well. Or just hit me up on Twitter at 4-Bit Friday. I'm 4-Bit Friday everywhere.
Do you use a tablet when creating pixel art?
Yes, I do use a tablet. I used a Wacom Intuos for a while, and then it broke after like many years of abuse. So now I'm currently using a I don't know how to pronounce it. It's Huion. It was way cheaper than Wacom, and it works perfectly fine. But yes, I do prefer using tablets for my art in all forms, regardless of whether it's pixel or not. Although sometimes I will switch to mouse if I'm doing like a really tiny sprite. But even then, I'll usually sketch it out with a tablet before I like go into the nitty gritty details with a mouse. And then sometimes I'll be working with a mouse and I'm like, why am I using this mouse? I hate using a mouse. I'm just going to use a tablet. Oh boy, I haven't made any progress. This is going slowly. All right, let's see. Keep them coming.
All right. Are there any types of techniques you find particularly effective or common in making good high-bit pixel art?
Let me think. So I think there are a lot of things that, like in graphic scale specifically, that I really like that sort of streamline my workflow. So for instance, one thing that I really like to do if I have something to outline, let me stop this animation again. If I have a blob that I need to outline, like let's say this is, a thing of some sort. Let's make this little happy guy again, right? This guy, he's back with his buttons. Let's say I have to like outline this entire shape. One thing that I find really, really helpful about graphic scale is it has the color replace tool, which lets me like draw. Oh, I'm on the wrong layer. Classic artist problem. The color replace tool lets me like draw freely without but only replacing the color that I have selected to replace. And what that allows me to do, in addition to just recoloring things, if I decide I don't like the color of it, is outline things very easily, because I can choose like a large sort of brush size and just go around the edges. And that like is much faster outlining than having to like place each individual single pixel and that sort of thing. I'm not sure which other pixel art programs have the color replace tool, but it's probably one of my like most used tools. Another thing to note might be that if you're doing pixel art and you're using it in a game and it's going to be rotated a lot and that sort of thing, it's good to note that straight lines, that is to say, lines in one of the four cardinal directions, rotate much more cleanly than diagonal lines. So if you're having to rotate any pixel art in a game, and you're keeping it in resolution and not resolution mixing and that sort of thing, you can see if I have like this diagonal line and try to rotate it, there we go. It gets real nasty. You see, it gets like if I just rotate it to a cardinal direction, it gets real grody and just kind of like it breaks up and that sort of thing. But if you have straight lines, they tend to keep their form a lot better. Like you can see the sides of them aren't like breaking up. Even if I make this one thick, a single line thick. So yeah, I'd say like keep your if you have stuff to rotate, try and keep it cardinal by default as much as possible. Yeah, that helps a lot to keep things looking much cleaner. Yeah, there's a lot like that. That's those sorts of things they're the kind of thing that you kind of like have to pay attention to, especially when you're working in pixel art. If you want it to look good throughout these like all these transformations and things that are becoming more common in modern games that use pixel aesthetics and that sort of thing. I'm sure I could probably think of more. I will try to keep thinking of those sorts of like little details and mention them if I can remember whenever I can.
All right. When creating a character for a pixel art game, do you normally go straight into creating pixel sprites, or do you create your concepts in a different medium and then translate it into pixel art?
It depends on the game and the style. For larger sprites, like and in higher resolutions, I'll usually try to do a larger, higher resolution concept beforehand. For smaller sprites, I will usually just jump straight into doing it as pixel art. Yeah, that's about it. And also, usually more often than not, I will just jump straight into the pixel art aspect of it before concepting anything else. And if I'm struggling with it, then I might go back to the concept phase and be like, oh, this needs work and solving.
All right, another question. What dartboard size do you use / how do you know how to scale properly?
What board size?
It says dartboard.
Dartboard. Do they mean artboard?
Probably.
Okay. Again, so this is something that comes down to is going to be on a game by game basis. I'm hesitant to like just make generalizations about like what's good and what's bad and what's best and all that sort of thing, because it's going to vary so much from game to game and from project to project. I kind of oscillate between enjoying working in really large sizes, like relative to pixel art, like 128 by 128, 96 by 96. I really like those sizes. And really tiny, like 16 by 16 and 8 by 8 is kind of annoying. But I oscillate between enjoying like working in the various sizes because they offer different challenges and different opportunities and sort of just senses of finality and of what the finished thing is going to be. They're both fun. Yeah.
All right, here's one. I have a question not related to the games themselves. What are your thoughts of pixel art content in the corporate / commercial space through brand activation combined with IP?
Wow, that's a fun question. Can you repeat that?
Sure. All right. What are your thoughts on pixel art content in the corporate / commercial space through brand activation combined with IP?
I think I see what you're saying. So like in terms of pixel art used outside of the context of games as just like an aesthetic for advertising and that sort of thing. I assume that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fine. It's like I said, pixel art isn't necessarily a style, it's a medium, and it's a valid medium for advertising your stuff if you wanna. I actually was hired a few years ago to this is kind of annoying, actually. I was hired a few years ago to not work on a game, but to work on a credit card. Like, they wanted a design for their credit card that was pixel art. And I made a piece that I thought was really good and fun and, charming. And they hated it and made me make some really just banal, boring nonsense that I absolutely hated working on. So in that sense, I'm not a huge fan of those sorts of things, but they did pay me eventually. I had to hound them for a while, but that's not a great story. I'm sorry, but so in that sense, like, I didn't like working with that particular company, but like, if you want to advertise your stuff in whatever style, like, that's fine. I'm not gonna tell you to stop or whatever. But I wouldn't do it again. I feel like the nature of that experience is probably more indicative of just being an artist in corporate culture as opposed to necessarily being a pixel artist in that particular, in any kind of corporate culture and that sort of thing.
All right. How does working in pixel art differ from other visual mediums?
Well, I think there's some misconceptions about pixel art that it's easier, specifically from gamers. I think, not necessarily from other game developers, but I see a lot of times, like, sometimes like gamers will be like, this game's pixel art, it's cheap. They didn't have a budget for like real art or whatever, and I'm like, forget you. That's not the case at all. Like, pixel art is not easier or cheaper necessarily than any other type of art. Can sometimes be quite a lot more time consuming than just drawing something in high resolution. But also a lot of times people ask me like, oh, how do you do shading, or how do you pick colors in pixel art and that sort of thing? And that's always been kind of a strange question to me, because it's like, you shade like you would anything. Like, it's just shading. Like, the way light works doesn't change when you move into pixel art suddenly. And the way color theory and composition and that sort of thing doesn't suddenly change when you move into pixel art. So there are a lot of differences, but there are also a lot of similarities and overlap. And I feel like a lot of what makes pixel art sort of special and specific is the fact that, like I was showing with the buttons earlier, and like on, especially, this is a bad example because this sprite is so large, but especially on smaller sprites, a single pixel can make such a huge difference. And that's like just a single decision you can make. And I feel like a lot of other art media don't really have that kind of just strict binary of like, here's a single decision I can make that changes one single pixel in this picture and completely changes the meaning of the entire thing. I feel like that's kind of what the core of pixel art comes down to, is just like having those sorts of moments where it's like, oh, I'm going to put this pixel here and it's going to mean this whole slew of things for the rest of the image. And I think another sort of thing about pixel art is that it can be used to like abstract. So like if you think of like a lot of like the older games that use pixel art and that sort of thing, like especially on NES and those sorts of things, a lot of the character designs, the iconic character designs were like in sprite form, just like super abstract and like, is that a nose? Is that a mustache? That sort of thing. That's something that I feel like, can still be leveraged in art today, and leaving things up to the player or viewer's mind of just like I don't know what I'm looking at, so I'm just going to fill in the blanks, and probably whatever I think of is maybe going to end up being a lot cooler than whatever was intended. Maybe not what was intended, but like what the artist could have executed on their particular time frame and budget and that sort of thing. Which I think is a pretty fun thing to play around with, is playing around with those spaces of abstraction and deliberately making certain details kind of obtuse so that people don't really know what exactly they're looking at and can fill in the blanks themselves.
All right, next question. How do I make my pixel art look good if I am not otherwise an artist?
Practice. It's the same answer as any kind of art or endeavor that you want to be good at. I will say though, and this goes for not just pixel art, but for all art in general, I feel like how do I phrase this? I feel like you can get away with a lot as long as you're consistent. And that's like a game with art that is bad in all the same way, I think, is visually compelling as compared to a game with art that is sometimes bad and sometimes good. Because to me, it kind of comes down to like a sense of intentionality. And I feel like if art is, mostly good, but then sometimes bad, the bad art is going to feel really unintentional, and it's going to make the whole thing feel worse to me. This is just my personal feelings. But if everything is equally bad, then it's going to be like, oh, they knew what they were doing. They meant to do all this stuff wrong. Sorry, that didn't answer the question at all. The answer to the question is practice, and do it a lot. Make a bunch of stuff. Study art that you like, pixel art that you like. Look at examples of games that you like would like to approach the style and quality of, and see what they do and how they do it. It's like I said, it's the same set of steps for learning any kind of art or craft. Is just practice and study it. Yeah.
All right, here's possibly a lighter one. Do you ever dream in pixels?
I don't know that I dream in pixels necessarily, but I've definitely dreamed in games that were pixeled. Like I've never had a dream that was like, oh, I'm going through like a real life situation now, but everything's pixel art. It's always been like, oh, I'm dreaming I'm in this really cool game. And I dreamt once that I made the best game in the world, and it got put in a museum, and it was really amazing. And then I woke up and couldn't remember what the game was, and I was really sad about that one. Yeah.
All right. Another question. When hiring a pixel artist, what should we expect to pay?
Personally, I tend to charge between $40 and $50 an hour for pixel art stuff. That's just sort of like my baseline, and any like compensation that I do that's below that, I try to make sure it's of at least that value. It depends on the artist, though. I know some artists who will charge like $60 an hour. I know a lot of artists who greatly undercharge, and that's not cool. So yeah, I would say like just try and compensate them fairly. Like I said, I usually try and be around $40 to $50 an hour, which is honestly probably a little lower than I should be, but it's where I'm at. I'll probably ask for more eventually, but I'll get there. Yeah.
All right. I believe we have time for one more.
I didn't get anywhere with this guy, man. I'm sorry about that. I was having such high expectations of myself. I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna have like a whole rough of this guy's swing and follow through and everything, and it's just not happening. He's still winding up.
All right. Well, let's see if we can squeeze his last one in.
Yeah.
What kinds of games might benefit most from a pixel aesthetic?
Well, obviously, there's, as I mentioned, kind of a nostalgia factor. So, like, if you want to play into that, then you can definitely use that and that sort of thing. But I feel like a lot of younger people never really experienced the era of gaming when pixel art was a necessary hardware restriction. So they have kind of a different context for their experience of pixel art, which is maybe more akin to like, kids, liking music from the 80s and that sort of thing when they were like, or like synthwave and that sort of thing, where it's like 80s aesthetic, but sort of completely disconnected from the experienced time frame. So like you can play into that and that sort of thing. But even aside from the whole historical aspect of pixel art and its place in gaming aesthetic, I think pixel art can be used to communicate things about the game itself. Like you might be able to use pixel art to communicate like, this game is kind of a purity of design, I think, can be communicated via pixel art, where like you look at some 3D game and you're like, I don't really know how to play that. It looks fun, but I don't know what's happening necessarily. But I feel like sometimes you can look at like a pixel art game and be like, I can kind of tell what's going on here. It's I think the nature of pixel art and the way it sort of enforces a simplification of design and visual elements also tends to lend itself well to being quickly readable, and especially if you use because pixel art has like the sort of built-in visual language of the entire history of video games in it. Like like if you see like a photorealistic 3D game, then your comparisons might be closer to like, oh, this looks kind of like a movie. But if you see a pixel art image of anything, you're going to have the association with video games, and you can leverage that to communicate certain video game tropes and language in terms of like, oh, this is a platformer, or this is, shoot 'em up and that sort of thing. So yeah, I think that's kind of a way to use, either you can maybe use pixel art if you're not explicitly tapping into the like remembered history of the style of the medium and that sort of thing. Yeah, maybe that.
All right, Tyriq. Well, with that, we're out of time.
Okay, I got 2.5 frames done. Nope, not even done. Thanks.
All right, thank you all for coming out. Again, this is Tyriq Plummer, and thanks again for attending.